So I recently made a video about the Nintendo Wii, sort of talking about how that console came to be, what made it so successful, and then what caused its eventual decline. However, I can't help but feel like I haven't finished that story. I feel like I've only told you one side of the coin. So here I am today to finish what I started by documenting the history of the Nintendo Wii U, from where it started to why it was such a failure, all the way down to how it became one of my favourite consoles of all time. But first, allow me to summarize this 30-minute video in 30 seconds. The year is 2006, Nintendo are lagging behind their competition after they saw record low sales for their home consoles with the GameCube. So they aimed to reinvent themselves in hopes of re-establishing themselves as the dominant gaming company, which they did by releasing the Wii, one of the most influential systems of all time. A few years later, the Wii sits firmly as the best-selling console of the generation, even surpassing the 100 million mark. However, by 2011, the Wii had slowed down dramatically. People had grown sick of the gimmick and were eagerly anticipating Nintendo's next console, which is where our story for today begins. The first piece of public information concerning Nintendo's next project came during April of 2011. However, the console itself was actually conceptualized much earlier than that, with the idea being thrown around as early as 2008, only 2 short years after the original Wii's launch. Nintendo had noticed a few flaws with the Wii, the same flaws that we've already covered, like the weak hardware and family feel. Nintendo's concerns with the Wii led them to theorize about an upgrade to it, one with HD capabilities, with the hopes that it would rekindle the love from their ever-growing distant fans. It was known among the community as Wii HD. However, due to how successful the original Wii already was, Nintendo felt like it wasn't warranted a re-release. Furthermore, Iwata, the president of Nintendo, stated that he saw no significant reason to update the Wii with HD graphics, instead deciding to hold off on that idea for the next console. But with this information already, we can clearly see that Nintendo were heavily interested in re-establishing themselves in the good books of their core audience. But it remained to be seen how they would approach achieving that. Fast forward back to April 2011 and we get our first glimpse into the future, as an anonymous source leaked a bunch of information to do with Nintendo's 8th generation system. These leaks ended up being scarily accurate, with information detailing the console's hardware capabilities, its backwards compatibility with Wii titles, and a new controller with a built-in screen, which, yeah. And lastly, a code name, that being Project Cafe. Only a short while later, on the 25th of April, Nintendo themselves confirmed that basically everything about the leak was true, that the console would be revealed at E3, which was only a couple months away at that point, and it would release at some point during 2012. Fans were understandably taken aback by this information, given how suddenly everything came out. I mean, the Wii was brewing for basically 3 years, but with the Project Cafe, we just got everything dropped on us at once. In many respects, it felt like an unplanned child, but that didn't stop excitement and conspiracy bubbling throughout the community. Again, only a few weeks after Nintendo's confirmation statement, there was yet another leak. This time, the leak showed video footage, supposedly taken from within a secret presentation in regards to the Project Cafe. But this time, the leaks wouldn't be nearly as accurate. In fact, they would be completely debunked by Nintendo UK. There was also an article posted by Video Game 24/7 confirming the false rumours. The article contains a portion written by Nintendo Universe which states that the video was first posted by a French blog site by the name of Strategy Interactive, and the footage itself was part of a student project in which they were tasked to create a viral video. But unfortunately, I can't find anything to do with this Strategy Interactive. As far as I know, they didn't even exist. And the link from the article to Nintendo Universe is now broken. But I'm bringing this up because firstly, it's interesting, but secondly, because the prototype the kids made doesn't at all look unrealistic to one that Nintendo could have actually made, so fair play to those kids. And with that being said, that's basically it regarding the mystery of Project Cafe, as on June 8th, Nintendo would host their yearly E3 presentation to reveal their new console, and it was a complete disaster. The Project Cafe ended up being the Wii U, one of Nintendo's worst business ventures in the history of their company. But I'm sure you already know that, so let's not beat around the bush and let's talk about it. Firstly, let's backtrack a few years to 2008 when the Wii U was first thought of. While the idea of an upgraded, more capable Wii sounds like a good one, and honestly it would have been had it released as the Wii HD in 2009, saving it for the next grand console was honestly a dumb, naive decision. Nintendo prided themselves as the company who would take risks, push boundaries. They looked down on their competition for only caring about the hardware. Yet here they are, releasing basically the same system but with better hardware. It was just such a negative approach for them. It went against everything they claimed they stood for. In the previous video, I described the Wii as a beacon of life and creativity, and if that's the case, then the Wii U was a dark abyss, void of any emotion. As for the name itself, the Wii U, what were they thinking? Beyond just being laughably dumb, the meaning behind the name is equally as moronic. The Wii was named the Wii because it was made for everybody. We can play together, that makes sense. The Wii U was named the Wii U because it was made for everybody. We can play together, but also you can play. I have no idea what that even means, but they said it about 12 times.
Yes, the game will probably still be right for all of us. But could it also be a perfect fit just for you?
Obviously, it was Nintendo's goal to bring back their core audience, which was a very wise decision, but if that was the goal, why would they name it the Wii U? It makes no sense why Nintendo would persist with a brand that traumatized the audience they're trying to market to. The Wii was the reason that the hardcore audience left. You'd think Nintendo would want to alienate themselves from it, but instead they're out here embracing it, running with it for another generation. This showed a complete disconnect between Nintendo and their audience, and it was straight up complacency. It's like they looked at the Wii sales and said, hey, everyone must have loved the Wii. Yes, we did love the Wii, but we were ready for it to die and we were ready to move on. That's why no one was playing it in its latter years. And you would have known this if you cared and you didn't buy into your own hype. Okay, enough about the Wii U branding. What about the console and its subsequent reveal? Well, much like the original Wii, the Wii U did attempt to implement its own new controller scheme. But the way they went about showing off their new controller basically killed it on arrival. You look back at the initial Wii reveal from 2006, and the way Nintendo did it was so simple and easy to follow. Here is our new console, this is what it looks like. Here is our new controller, this is what it does. Here is some examples of our new controller working with our new games for our new console. Got it? We all got it. But the way they did it for the Wii U was just so disjointed. Firstly, the console itself wasn't even shown at the conference, so fans did not have a visual representation of what they were watching. So Nintendo tried to sell it to us by going like this. Here is our new controller, it's for our new console, but we're not going to show the actual console here because that's not relevant. Here is some examples of our new controller working with games that you've already played. Literally, the examples they used were Wii Sports and New Super Mario Bros. U, a game that is indistinguishable from its Wii counterpart, making it even more confusing. And finally, and most damningly, here is an example of our new controller working with our old controller. For instance, there's this scene in the trailer where a lady puts the Wii U gamepad on the floor, stands over it and plays golf while using her Wiimote. Nobody is gonna see this clip and think, yeah, that controller on the ground, the one that nobody is paying attention to, that is the controller for their new console that is coming out next year. Instead, they're gonna be thinking, oh, another gimmicky Wii controller. There was nothing in this conference to suggest that the Wii U was a new console. It had the same names, same games, and the same controller, and they didn't even show the console, not even a prototype. This meant that the Wii U wasn't greeted with excitement, it wasn't greeted with anger, it was greeted with confusion, which is the worst reaction possible. Nobody wanted to play the Wii again, but that's what Nintendo was seemingly giving us. Not to mention that the concept of the gamepad was nowhere near as exciting or captivating as the motion controls, so casuals viewed it as nothing special and the core viewed it as yet another gimmick, so literally nobody wanted to be part of this thing. It's safe to say that E3 2011 was a clusterfuck, and it was going to be very challenging for Nintendo to get people back on their side, and sadly this challenge was too great for them to pull off. A year later, at E3 2012, Nintendo gave their final conference before the release of the Wii U, giving them one final opportunity to clear up some of the confusion surrounding the system and hopefully win some people back on their side. And while this conference by all accounts was extremely solid, they did a good job at explaining themselves while also showcasing some interesting titles such as Pikmin 3, it was simply too little too late for redemption. Their conference paled in comparison to Sony, and the Wii U was firmly placed in purgatory. A few grueling months later, the Wii U officially launched on November 18th, 2012, marking the beginning of Nintendo's Deep Depression. As you can probably tell, the Wii U's launch was actually pretty good. You didn't expect that, did you son of a bitch? I have to keep you on your toes in a video as long as this one. But no, even though everything pointed to a catastrophic launch for the Wii U, the console very much held its own. Well, during the first month anyway, helping itself to 890,000 sales in only 6 weeks of it being out. Now, this is for a few reasons. Firstly, Nintendo are extremely blessed with their fanbase. They have a rabid fanbase who would buy just about anything with a Nintendo logo on. So no matter how badly they market their products, and no matter how bad their products actually are, they will always see strong sales at launch due to how passionate some of their fans are. Another reason for the short-term success is that the Wii U actually had a very solid set of games available for launch, way stronger than that of the Wii. There was a Mario game, albeit the worst type of Mario game, but yeah, you can't complain too much. There was Zombie U, a fairly polarizing title released by Ubisoft, which at that point was an exclusive for the system. And whether you liked the game or not, it was definitely a welcome inclusion to the library, and one of the few games that validated the existence of the gamepad. Speaking of third-party titles, there was a lot of them: Black Ops 2, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and Mass Effect 3 to name a few. Granted, all of these titles were either a little inferior to their other platform equivalent or had already been available for months on said other platform. But that's what we've come to expect from Nintendo third-party support. We aren't that picky. If these ports were anything to go by, the Wii U was certainly powerful enough to home some pretty good third-party games. Sure, none of them were the definitive way to experience the title, but they offered a more than solid alternative for those who only had access to the Wii U versions. It's just a shame that most of the developers would go on to distance themselves from the system altogether before realizing its full potential. All in all, the Wii U's launch was great, all things considered. 400,000 sales in 1 week is nothing to be scoffed at by any standard. Having said that, the figure becomes much more depressing when you realize the Wii U would only sell 400,000 32 more times over the next 213 weeks. As 2013 commenced, the Deep Depression really began to settle in. This was a foul, rotten, vile year for Nintendo and its fans. No one was having fun, we were all just bent over and taking it. Despite being relatively new and fresh, the Wii U already felt like a barren wasteland that had been left abandoned for years. Sales dried up after Christmas, games were non-existent, and the system was in complete freefall. This was the year that Nintendo were hit really hard by the lack of third-party support. Look, nobody is buying a Nintendo product for the third-party games because there's always going to be a better version of that game available elsewhere. That much is clear. But what they do is they plug the gaps between the big first-party games with at least something to play. A Nintendo console without the third-party support is like a burger without the buns. Yeah, you're still left with the best bit, but everything just feels more empty now. I think the issue was that Nintendo hadn't prepared enough first-party games for 2013 since they expected to have much more support from outside sources. A fair thought to have since most major companies had insisted they were committed to the Wii U project. So when some of their biggest allies including EA, Bethesda and Activision all disowned the system at various points during the year, they were nowhere near equipped with enough first party games to fill the void left by their departures. And then of course you have the infamous Rayman Legends saga. For those who don't know, Ubisoft developed this game as a Wii U exclusive, but just as its release date was looming, they decided to delay it by 9 months. So they could port it to the PS4 and Xbox One. All of this meant that the Wii U felt very futile. For context on how truly dry the whole thing was, between April and June, the Wii U sold less than 200,000 units, the type of figure that the Wii was doing in certain weeks. But don't let any of that fool you, because the few games that we did get this year were fantastic. There was the before mentioned Pikmin 3, a glorious game which remains one of my favourites till this day. A couple cool party games reminiscent of the Wii such as Wii Fit U and Wii Party U were shit. Rayman Legends finally came out and proved itself as one of the strongest 2D platformers of the decade. Lego City Undercover was a charming exclusive that blew everyone away with how good it was. And The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker HD finally made people realise that the original was one of the best games in the franchise. 2013 was capped off with the November release of Super Mario 3D World, which was the first Wii U game to garner any real traffic from the mainstream. The pulling power of 3D Mario mixed with the holiday release of the game meant that sales shot up dramatically in the final quarter. In fact, basically every game I just mentioned came out after June, so after an extremely slow start, the year ended on a pretty high note. The Wii U ended the year with a total sale count of 3.6 million. And while this figure was by no means anything to write home about, in fact it was pretty atrocious, at least it was something, and after the extended torture that was the first half of 2013, something was enough for me, man. The library of games was steadily filling up, the console felt like it had a semblance of direction rather than lurking in limbo like it was seemingly destined to do. And all in all, there was a lot of things for us fans to be optimistic about. And although sadly for Nintendo, the sales would never truly pick up, with us already accounting for nearly a quarter of the lifetime sales in only 1 year, the console still had a lot to provide for those who were willing to take a chance on it. 2014 was by far the strongest year of the Wii U so far, and one of the best for a Nintendo console in terms of content in quite some time. This time, Nintendo were much better prepared to combat the lack of third-party support with their own quality titles, while also remaining on good terms with certain outside developers such as Platinum Games, the studio who brought us Bayonetta 2, an excellent action-adventure game and probably the best third-party title of the Wii U's entire library, which I'm aware is a bit like picking your favorite STD, but hey, someone's gotta win. This was the year that Nintendo started to really push the Wii U. In many respects, it was make or break time. The console had achieved basically nothing in its first year and a bit on the market except some decent games, and was in serious danger of falling even more irrelevant. So Nintendo did what they do best. They made some incredible games. Let's take a look at some examples. There was Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which between you and I is my favourite game of the year, and along with Rayman Legends is one of the best examples of a modern 2D platformer. Hyrule Warriors was a weird experiment that worked for some and not so much for others, and despite it not being the new groundbreaking Zelda we were all clamoring for, it was still one of those unique games that just made the Wii U library stand out from the rest of the crowd. Same thing with Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, an endearing puzzle game which I want to say was the first big new IP of the system, and although it was merely a spin-off from Mario 3D World, it still managed to grow and stand on its own 2 feet as a new, innovative experience. And then there were the two big boys, Mario Kart 8 and Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, arguably the two biggest and most successful franchises in Nintendo's catalogue, and they released basically back to back with only a few months to separate them. This just goes to show how desperate Nintendo were to make this console stick. Did it work? Not really. Sales spiked briefly around the time of each release, however they would basically flatline shortly thereafter, which basically indicated to everyone that the Wii U was dead in the water. Sure, the thing still had a few more years of life in the tank, but realistically, if Mario Kart can't save your console, then nothing can. With that being said, the Wii U wasn't quite done yet. 2015 was a pretty good year in retrospect. It was a year dominated by two major titles, along with a few sleeper hits hidden amongst the crowd. Xenoblade X was decent, if a step down from the original. Yoshi's Woolly World was a Yoshi game for the system, plus the art style was pretty cool, but I think it fits nicely in a category with Captain Toad and Hyrule Warriors, games that make me smile but didn't exactly blow me away with their brilliance. Mario Party 10 came out this year and was Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival came out this year and was but these are pussy games. It's about time we got to the real shit. Mario Maker. This was the game that every kid wanted growing up, yet it managed to be better and more functional than anybody could have imagined. Don't get me wrong, at times playing this game is about as fun as playing with your weird ass neighbor, and some of these levels are probably responsible for a few psychotic serial killers, but even in these rage inducing moments, the game still managed to be so fun and so charming. There was nothing else like it. It was the source of creativity that the console was crying out for. Finally, a game that utilized the gamepad to actually enhance the experience, rather than making it feel like a cheap, gimmicky burden that developers were forced to do something with. The Wii U version of Mario Maker is one of the few games that is actually better than its Switch counterpart, and it's all due to how vital the gamepad was in helping the game flourish. Plus, there's something so poetic about the most dreamt of, the most wanted Nintendo game ever, being released on the least popular device they'd ever put out. It felt as if Nintendo were reaching out to their fans and saying thank you for sticking with us during this time. But the Wii U was still crying out for that truly unique, generation-defining title. Yeah, Mario Maker was new and amazing, but it was still a 2D Mario game. Mario Kart 8 was cool, but it was still Mario Kart. Pikmin 3 was tantalizing, but it was still just Pikmin. Every major Wii U game had a similar version on a different system. Not to devalue these games in any way, but the Wii U needed its version of Wii Sports, a game that hadn't thrived on any other system. And on the 28th of May 2015, that game would release, in the form of a deformed squid. Splatoon is the embodiment of Nintendo. I've made an entire video about it before, so I'll keep it brief here. Splatoon worked because Nintendo took the most boring, generic, played out genre and they made it their own, with exhilarating gameplay mechanics, maps and modes. This is exactly what they've always done, taken winning formulas and flipped them upside down and said, here, have this instead. That was exactly what made the Wii work. The importance of Splatoon is underrated because in many ways I feel like it marked the turning point for Nintendo. It showed the world that even in their darkest, most uninspired days they are still capable of making games that will truly stun you. And with Splatoon, the Wii U was finally ready to be laid to rest. 2015 felt like an around the world tour, thank you and goodbye for the Wii U. 2016 felt like a never ending funeral. If you want to know the true feeling of emptiness, just try being a Wii U owner in 2016. Basically nothing noteworthy happened this year. Star Fox Zero came out and was underwhelming, Paper Mario Color Splash came out and was slightly less underwhelming but not great, Twilight Princess came out for the third time, and Mighty No. 9 sucked bongo dick. And that was basically it. Nintendo had given up on the console by this point and were fully focused on their next console, then simply known as the Nintendo NX, and people were looking forward with them, more than willing to leave the Wii U in the dust. On January 31st, 2017, the Wii U was officially discontinued a whole month before the Switch even came out, marking the end of its underwhelming yet underrated tenure, but in turn making way for the most successful Nintendo console to date. The Wii U ended with a modest lifetime sale count of only 13.56 million, a ginormous drop off from the 101 million the original Wii managed. The Wii U is universally known as a complete flop, a failure if you will. You can't look this thing up without being greeted by hundreds of video essays just shitting all over it. But what caused this otherwise great console to be such a calamity? Well, people can throw all sorts of reasons at you all day long. Oh, the gimmick sucked ass, there were no games at launch. No, the failure of the Wii U comes down to one thing: complacency on Nintendo's part. They looked at the Wii's success and thought everyone must have loved it, so they did it again without understanding the magic that made the original so successful. For as amazing as some of the Wii games were, the majority of people weren't interested in the games, they wanted the gimmick. So when you take away the gimmick, you're left with absolutely nothing. When making the Wii U, Nintendo was seemingly caught in two minds. Do we completely revamp our approach so we can regain the trust of our former fans? Or do we continue catering to the casuals? And they ended up settling on doing both by making a console for the core while naming it for the casuals, without realizing that nobody wanted the Wii. And they would have known that if they paid attention to their surroundings instead of focusing on this number. The god-awful marketing didn't help either. The gimmick consumed the console even more so than the original Wii. At least then, there was still an emphasis on the actual system. The Wii U was marketed as an accessory and treated and received as such. Speaking of the gamepad, while I admit it certainly wasn't the finest piece of technology ever crafted, are you really going to say that it was a reason for the Wii U's failure? This thing, a bad controller. You say that like Nintendo haven't been making bad controllers forever. For me, it was entirely the name and the gimmick that killed the Wii U, nothing to do with the games or the gimmick. But enough about the negatives. I want to have a heart-to-heart with you, the viewer, my fellow Wii U gamer. Is it fair to label this thing as a failure? Well, from Nintendo's point of view, it's an emphatic yes because they lost a lot of money because of it. But from the perspective of the average consumer, you and I, well, no, I don't think it is fair. The Wii U supplied me with some great memories, from the Miiverse shenanigans to the Nintendo Directs, and most importantly, an extensive list of brilliant games. Games that couldn't be experienced elsewhere. Well, until they were all ported to the Switch, but shh. Don't let Nintendo fool you, they are extremely insecure and embarrassed by this system. But I don't think they should be. In fact, I think they should be proud of what they accomplished. Without getting all sappy on you, Nintendo were left in a very tough predicament. They were abandoned by all the developers who swore to support them. They were the laughingstock of the gaming community. Hell, they were the laughingstock of their own community. However, over the course of 3 or so years, they somehow, against all odds, managed to single-handedly build a very strong library of games through nothing more than hard work and passion, even when they weren't being rewarded. And I think there's something truly endearing about that. The Wii U was far from perfect, but I think it's time we give a bit more respect to this son of a bitch for what it achieved, even if that's just for being the gateway to the Switch. The Wii and the Wii U share some similarities, but their stories play out in reverse. The original Wii came out during a time when Nintendo were on the back foot. They were the underdogs, they couldn't do anything right. But through persistence and creativity, they managed to create a console that would change all of that, helping them reclaim their throne. It was a magical time where everything just fell into place. They could do no wrong, they felt untouchable. But due to this godlike status, they grew complacent and started to take their foot off the gas. And these self-destructive tendencies carried over to the Wii U, which came out during a time when Nintendo were on top, they were riding high. But because of that complacency, they lost sight of their goals, they lost their identity, and they suffered because of it. There was a time where nothing would fall in place for Nintendo, they were very much touchable. But over the next few years, through the same hard work and creativity they showed previously, they managed to turn this once doomed console into something special. However, by that point the damage was already done, and as the console perished, Nintendo found themselves in the same spot they were in prior to the original Wii, thus completing the cycle. They are truly two sides of the same coin.